Mahashi's Global Family Chat. News of rising invincibility around the world. This is the news everyone needs to understand how the trends of time are changing towards peace and prosperity. Mahashi's Vedic technologies, transcendental meditation, and its advanced program Yogic Flying are being implemented globally. Just the square root of 1% of the population practicing yogic flying together in a group is enough to raise the levels of harmony and coherence in the collective consciousness for the whole population. Enjoy the news of enlightenment dawning for every individual, invincibility for every nation, and peace for our dear world. Jai Gurudev. Welcome to Mahashi's Global Family Chat on the 23rd of June 2021. Today we welcome Dr. Robert Schneider in the third of the three Mahashi Global Family Chats about an online conference which he organized and which was entitled Beyond Immunity, Transforming Health. This conference was hosted by Mahashi International University on the 9th of July last year. And for this conference, Dr. Schneider gathered medical professionals who are leaders in the field of mind-body medicine and integrative health to join hands and work together to create a new model of health that is more comprehensive and addresses all levels of life, from the far environment to the body, to the mind, and to the inner self, Atma. 2 days ago, on the 21st of June, Dr. Schneider presented the idea in the first of these three series on Mahashi's Global Family Chat. He presented the idea of the Connectome to help address this need. Then yesterday, on the 22nd of June, the address of Dr. Tony Nader, MD, PhD, who we enjoyed. And Dr. Nader emphasized that the true basis for ideal health is the primordial reality of our own consciousness, Atma. Also, other experts have presented, including Dr. Suzanne Steinbaum, who is a cardiologist and spokesperson for the American Health Association, Dr. Remy Coiteau, who is director of the Wake Forest School of Medicine, Center for Integrative Medicine, and Dr. Mimi Guarneri, global president of the Academy of Integrated Health and Medicine. And now this evening, our third Mahashi Global Family Chat in the series, we again welcome Dr. Robert Schneider, who, as most of us know, is Dean of the College of Integrative Medicine, Professor of Physiology and Health, and Director of the Institute for Natural Medicine and Prevention at Mahashi International University in Iowa in the United States. Dr. Schneider this evening will be taking the subject further in terms of his expertise in the ancient knowledge of Mahashi Ayurveda and advances in modern medical research, and addressing the challenge of going beyond individual immunity to global immunity. So it's fascinating, Dr. Schneider. I'm sure all our viewers will be really interested to hear about this theme. And so a very warm welcome to you, and please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Swan. It's a pleasure to be with you again and to elaborate and expand on some of these themes which are most relevant to global health today. To think and talk about from a Vedic and a modern perspective, going from individual immunity to global immunity and how they interact with each other. In the last session, I talked about the Connectome, the 4 domains of total health, from the innermost self, the unified field or pure consciousness that Dr. Nader emphasized, to the mind, to the body, and to the environment. The environment is everything outside our individual self, our social environment, our physical environment, in the whole universe. And I'd like to go more deeply into that concept today. And for that, I'd like to go back to Maharishi, who was the first that I'm aware of to write about this holistic concept back in 1963 in The Science of Being and Art of Living. This is actually a scan from the original, one of the original copies of The Science of Being in his section called The Key to Good Health. And in that, he talks about these 4 domains. Life is first divided into absolute and relative, as he described. And then in current terminology, but same idea, we talk about the unified field of natural law or pure consciousness. And then the relative is the set of manifest expressions. And Maharishi described the relative as being 3 domains: the physical, the mental, and the environmental or surroundings. So all told, there are 4 domains that are key to good health. And those are all the domains of life and existence as we know it. And then further on in the page, and this is direct photograph or scan of my ancient Science of Being. And then Maharishi talks about how these 4 actually come out to 7. And he says on the bottom, unless all these 7 points are taken into account, the consideration of health will always remain incomplete and cannot provide a complete solution to the problem. In order that a correct and complete solution be brought to light, it is necessary to consider all 7 aspects of the individual life. And they're listed up top: being or pure consciousness or the unified field, the mind, the first expression of pure consciousness, the body, the next expression, surroundings or the environment, the next expression, and then the relationship or coordination of being and mind, the coordination of mind and body, and the coordination of the body and surroundings. So these 3 relationships, these 4 domains and the 3 relationships, back in 1963, Maharishi emphasized, are all required for total health, or else you're partial. And after that time, there were many other writers talking about what they call the biopsychosocial approach to health, biopsychosocial. Some people talk about the biopsychosocial spiritual, and then holistic health and medicine came after that, then integrative medicine came after that. But he started it, as far as I can tell. And this we're going to zoom in on. But first, this is my redrawing of those same 7. The big 4, environment, body, mind, and the unified field of the laws of nature. And then here highlighted the relationship between the environment and the body, the relationship between the body and the individual mind, relationship between the total environment and the individual body, relationship of a person's body to their mind, and then that relationship to the unified field. Those are the big 7. However, too often in the field of integrative health, which I'm very active in modern holistic medicine, and even in Vedic medicine or Ayurveda is conventionally practiced, we don't consider these 7 dimensions as Maharishi asked us to. often Ayurveda's conventionally practiced focuses on the body, which is certainly one of the seven, but one out of seven. The mind, certainly, with transcendental meditation is very important. But that's also, and it has influences on the rest. But today we're going to emphasize where the star is, the environment, and how that contributes to individual and collective health and its relationship to the other domains. And for that emphasis on environmental health and how collective actions contribute to environmental health and how they interact with each other, I'm going back to Maharishi and the Science of Being, and I want to acknowledge this slide from Dr. Peter Swan's collection. Let's go through this part. It's essential. Again, back from 1963. This is 60 years ago, nearly. The great exponents of medical science in ancient India, Charak and Sushruta, have shown that as long as people behave righteously, the atmosphere remains full of harmonious vibrations. The crops are good, the sun shines, it rains at desirable times, and the whole of creation enjoys everything in the atmosphere. But when people lose righteousness and act against the moral codes of life, the balance of nature is disturbed, and the atmosphere breaks into such collective calamities as famines, floods, disasters, and all that damages life in the world. This gives us a measure of assessing the health of the world. So in Maharishi's first book, I'm not sure if it's his first book, but we could call it his first major book coming out to the world, he talked about these collective calamities related to natural disasters and other disasters. And certainly the world has been experiencing its share of collective disasters in the past year or two or so. So this is very relevant. And he references Charak and Sushruta Samhita as his source, those timeless sources of Vedic wisdom. So I'd like to go back to Charak Samhita that Maharishi refers to and discuss what he says about environmental health and calamities. This section is from, it's called Vimanasthana, and there's this particular section, Janapado Devan Saniya, which is about natural disasters and epidemics of disease. Certainly the world is dealing with its own epidemic or pandemic right now, and other natural disasters, floods, typhoons, heat waves, fires. And Charak says that these are related to disturbances of the air, water, land, and season or climate. So floods, obviously related to water, land. Dr. Swan can speak more about land disasters and agriculture. Season, climate change is certainly an issue now in the world, and that's having its effects on the physical and lived environment. And air, certainly, there's tornadoes, there's hurricanes, and the air carries microorganisms. The air transmits viral epidemics or pandemics. So those are described thousands and thousands of years ago. And what is the cause of those natural disasters and epidemics of disease? Charak says there's one cause. That is the unrighteous behavior of the people affecting the environment. He gives examples of unrighteous behavior of the people: fighting, wars, violence, greed, anger. Those are just examples. there are many others of unmoral, unethical, and unrighteous behavior. And this behavior of the people affects the air, water, the land, and the season, affects the natural environment. The environment of the people affects the natural environment. And then one has these disasters and calamities. Fortunately, Charac gives some remedies. First remedy is right and moral behavior on the level of individuals and communities. And there are 13 steps of right and moral behavior that Charac prescribes. And second, Charac describes physiological effects to strengthen the immune system, physiological methods, cleansing and restoration of the immune system, particularly for resisting these epidemics. And that's broadly in the category of rasayana therapy in Ayurveda. Well, what are these 13 steps anyway? Funnily enough, or synchronistically enough, in June 2020, in the middle of the challenges in global health history, JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, one of the leading medical journals in the world, published an article entitled The Moral Determinants of Health. Well, let's go back for a minute. Charac is saying that pandemics and disasters are related to immoral behavior and recommends correcting that behavior to moral behavior in 13 ways. Well, somehow JAMA got that message and published an article on the moral behavior determinants of health, same as Charac, or I would say, expressing that in modern times. This is from that author's Twitter account, his hand-drawn summary of what he believes are the moral determinants of health. And this comes out of JAMA. You know, that's like Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine. This is the top medical voice in the world as a publication. And he's talking about compassion, mercy, solidarity, togetherness, unity, love, kindness, as the moral behavioral determinants of health of society during the COVID era and generally in our time. Now I'd like to talk about the physiological effects of moral behavior and how behavior and the environment affect the individual through a known physiological mechanism that connects the environment with the individual. And that's called the epigenome. Epigenome relates to epigenetics. Let me describe. And this came out in Lancet Thorax a few years ago. But on the left-hand side, you see the environment. So on the lower left is the environment, the climate, green spaces, the urban environment. Think Vastu. Think the design of cities and buildings, traffic, social capital, which is social support systems. And then on the upper left, you see more personal environments, the environment of air pollution, tobacco, chemicals in the products that we consume and use in our household, our diet, which we directly imbibe, and the quality of water. So all of these are external, but they get into us. These are all external influences, and our theme today is the relationship between the environment, that first domain that Maharishi talked about, or one of those main 4 domains, and how it affects the individual. And according to modern medicine, these environmental factors affect that are outside of us, affect our internal environment. And our internal environment, there are many layers of our internal physiology. The deepest layer in the physical level is our DNA, which is called the genome. The genome is fixed at the time of conception. However, there's an environment immediately around our DNA. It kind of encapsulates or surrounds our DNA molecule. And that's not the genome, which is the DNA part, but around the genome is the epigenome. And these are molecules which control the DNA, how it's expressed, how it's turned on or turned off. You could say it's the second genome. And it's this internal environment, it's called transcriptomics in this diagram, but that's a fancy word for the DNA molecule and what's around the DNA molecule and how the DNA is transcribed or expressed. So it's been found that air pollution, earthquakes, diet, stress, all of these factors in the external environment actually affect our epigenome and cause restrictions and changes in that internal environment. And sometimes those are unhealthy, actually, and sometimes are healthy. But these negative factors cause negative effects on the epigenome, and that causes, on the most right-hand side, increased health risk, weakening of the immune system, and more chronic diseases and more acute diseases, shorter lifespan. Of course, these external environments can be more positive. One could have clean air and clean diet, and that has positive effects on the internal environment, and that in turn has positive effects on one's overall health. So this is a dynamic between the environment. So Vastu is not separate from our DNA, for example. The quality of our air, the quality of our soil, and all these, and then actually it feeds back the other way too. But it goes from the individual back to the environment, but we'll elaborate on that in a minute. But I wanted to show this direction and the physiology behind it. Now, this is a very interesting illustration from the Journal of the American College of Cardiology on epigenetics. This is about changes in one's DNA expression, change in one's epigenome. And on the bottom, there's on the horizontal axis, you see these environmental exposures, stress in the environment, toxins in the environment, for example, or other environmental disturbances, smoking, diet, chemical contaminants, and social stress, like in our social relationships. And all of those have been documented to change our DNA expression, our inner environment. Now, here's the second key point I want to highlight. Notice this pregnant woman, this baby, and these adults. Moving from left to right is the life course from prenatal environment to neonatal environment, childhood, adulthood, and old age. This is a lifetime exposure to the environment, and this lifetime exposure to the environment affects our DNA, affects our body, and affects our mind at every stage of life, and it's cumulative. And in this case, leads to cardiovascular disease, or it can help prevent cardiovascular disease, but many other health conditions are included in this. So that's one point. Beginning in the prenatal environment with this pregnant mother here representing that. But now let's look at the vertical axis. What could that be? The vertical axis represents environmental influences prior to birth. However long you consider prior to birth to be, but according to this article in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, at least it relates to your parents and your grandparents, and probably farther than that their exposure to the environment affects you. If your grandparents lived during the potato famine in Ireland 100 years ago, you might be more tending to obesity now because you're hungry. Or if you survive the Holocaust, another disaster, a community public health disaster, and whatever, and other, so environmental, diet, chemical, radiation exposure, that affects the epigenome of your ancestors. And when your mother and father got together, they contributed their DNA to your genome. And funnily enough, or interestingly enough, they not only contributed to your genome, they contributed to your epigenome. So that may or may not have changed their DNA, which has a different kind of way of changing through mutation, and Darwin talked all about that. But now we're talking about much more rapid changes and changes that are much more sensitive to the environment in the epigenome, which again controls the DNA expression. So those epigenetic changes can be transmitted through the generations. So this whole lifetime and pre-lifetime exposure to your environment is called one's exposome. These are the new language of modern science. So the exposome is your whole lifetime and pre-lifetime experience, which shapes your DNA. Now, let's fast forward to like this past year, when The Lancet, one of the leading medical journals in the world with JAMA, got wind of this, and they announced a new discipline and a new journal called Planetary Health. And Planetary Health picks up on what Maharishi wrote about 60 years ago and what Charak expressed thousands of years ago. Planetary Health broadens health research and health medicine to include the external systems that sustain or threaten human health, and how those external systems interact with our internal systems, our internal environment. So we're back to the big four: environment, body, mind, and your consciousness. So now Lancet's saying, let's formally look at the environment and its interrelationship with the body and the mind. And that's illustrated here in this diagram from Lancet. It's talking about how the climate, the urban environments, the air, the weather, all affect human health and physiology. And Dr. Swan and others have been talking about this, I'm sure, in global chats, the oceans, climate change, for example, the soil. But now there are a few other points that Lancet's bringing out. Politics, now we're getting into moral and social determinants of health, how the healthcare system of a country, for example, affects individual health, migration, industry and pollution, even the economy and how that relates to access to food and shelter and the basic necessities of life. So this is a much broader consideration of health. This looks at the whole planet from the physical and the man-made environments and how they affect individual health, but the arrows go the other way too. That man or people, individuals and communities affect the air through pollution and other means. They affect agriculture. They affect the physical environment. They affect the soil. They affect the oceans. They affect politics. They affect industry. They affect the economy. And this is what Charak was saying, that if people act immorally and unrighteously, it's reflected in their environment. And all of this is included in people's environment. And that disturbed environment comes back to the individual and affects in the individuals through natural disasters, disease, epidemics, pandemics, and public health disturbances. I remember discussing this with Maharishi many years ago. I was traveling on an international speaking tour, and I was going to some big conference, and I had a chance to meet Maharishi on the way. And he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to this big conference and I'm presenting." And he said, "What are you presenting on?" And I said, "Well, I'm presenting on transcendental meditation and heart health, an area that I'd worked on a long time and I considered a breakthrough." And then he said, "Tell them that the collective consciousness affects the individual state of heart health." And I go, wow. He said, "Tell them about the environment and the collective consciousness, which is the product of individual behavior, thoughts and behavior, feeds back on the individual heart health." So he always had this emphasis for total health. And that's the angle that I wanted to share with you today. And I want to highlight to you that going beyond individual immunity to global immunity and health, it's all in the connectome, which means the connection of all these domains of health, these 7 points that we could also think of as planetary health. There you are, Dr. Swan.
Very beautiful. Dr. Schneider, very, very fascinating and broadening. Wonderful to see this wide angle view that Maharishi always took. He took the widest possible view. Nothing can be excluded. So the one question that popped up in my mind as you were explaining about the epigenome and life, the exposome, all that we and our forebears have been exposed to. Because now, my forebears were indeed from Ireland and no doubt experienced something of the potato famine. So something of that, maybe the stress of it, maybe the malnutrition of it, maybe affects my current genome. Now, my question is, does my current experience, my current health, or can my current experience, what I do in my life now, can it change my exposome?
Yes. Very good question. Yeah, that's related to the 13 steps of Charak. That your lifetime exposure, quote, which is the sum of all your exposures, called the exposome. And that exposome can have positive or negative influences on your epigenome, which is the DNA covering your DNA, in a positive or negative way. I mean, it's probably a gradient, but we could simply say in a health promoting way or in a health disturbing way. So yes, you can manage your exposome. That's the whole point of free will. One point is, in terms of today's main points, one of them is these natural disasters and calamities and epidemics are not random, that there's a reason for that. There's order in the universe. And the other point is we have some free will in what we do about that, because man's actions and behaviors contributed to that disturbance, but man's moral actions and acting in accord with natural law can create a positive atmosphere and environment, which would feed back positive influences. So yes, you can manage the environment. You can manage the air. You can manage the water. You can manage the land. Those are examples in a proper way, which I'm sure you teach in your Vedic agriculture courses. Yes, you can manage industry. Yes, you can manage your diet. Yes, you can manage your state of mind. Yes, you can transcend on an individual level, which changes uh, the epigenome. We just published a paper, at MIU, a group published a paper about 2 months ago showing that transcending during transcendental meditation changes gene expression. And then collective, from the Vedic point of view, collective transcending is a potent tool for managing the social stress, uh, in managing collective consciousness, managing the environment without even interacting with people from that larger unified field at the basis of everyone's consciousness perspective. So yes, and there are those moral behaviors. The simple things, there are simple things, and there are relative behaviors, and then there are thought behaviors. There's physical behaviors. There's social behavior, physical behavior, individual, bodily behaviors. There are mental, what we think. If someone's mad at you, you can often tell that even if they don't say anything. So those are mental behaviors affecting the environment. And then there's the spiritual level, or the pure consciousness level, the transcendental level. So there are those four domains. Each of them are relevant that Maharishi outlined, and actually those three interrelationships, those 7 dynamics. So yes, all of those behaviors are important, or else we wouldn't have all these instructions and guidances from Maharishi and the other rishis on how to manage our economy so it's equitable, how to manage our healthcare system, how to manage our agricultural system. Maharishi had all those ministries for managing all those levels.
Now, as you're talking, I'm thinking about when the group of Invincible America Assembly was adequate, was a good size, 1,700 yogic flyers practicing together every day. Yes. Then hurricanes almost disappeared from North America. And then after the group became smaller, the hurricanes seem to come back again.
Yes, there are many publications. Dr. Michael Dilbeck and Dr. Ken Kavanagh published a whole series of publications documenting trends of quality of life during the time when the super radiance group, the adequate number was there in the United States. Certainly many of the trends reversed. And certainly every continent needs those groups, as Maharishi advised. So somehow we're seeing those signs that we need to restore balance in the environment. And this past year has been a very strong sign to all of us that people's contributions are much bigger than we thought in the past. Many of us thought in the past. From this holistic perspective, the groups on every continent, the world groups, and all these other behaviors have their effect, can have their effect.
Now, we meditate, we transcend, and is this this affects our epigenome, right?
Yes.
We experience. Could you talk a bit about that and this research that you just mentioned, that TM changes the gene expression? How does that work?
Yeah. So basically, everyone's fetus.
Excuse me, but that means that I come out with a different physiology at that deep level than I went into meditation.
That's right. Yeah, in principle, we didn't, not we, Dr. Waynu and Dr. Ken Walton and Dr. Fakin did the study here at MIU. They didn't study one meditation, but in principle, yes, you could probably anticipate that even one meditation would have those effects because the epigenome changes very rapidly. Our genetic code is in our DNA. Those two strands, which have all those codes embedded in them. And that determines a lot of things, the color of our hair, our mind, body type, and many aspects of our health, predisposition towards lifespan. Not total. Actually, I want to answer a couple of your questions, so let me try to get them all in one commentary. Char talks about two influences on the trends of health for individuals. One, effectively from your DNA, which is from the past. You're born with your DNA, and that has come down from the past. And one could have an interesting discussion about that from the Vedic point of view. But let's just say that comes from your past, and you have to deal with that in your life. That's your DNA. That's it. And modern science agrees with that. And I believe the Vedic scriptures agree with that. And then if you ask Dr. Nader, he would say that the DNA, when you're born, reflects the DNA of the universe. You can take a picture of the universe at the time you're born, and they correlate with each other, the sun, moon, stars, and planets, because they have their parallels in the human nervous system and in the DNA. So even that, there's a universe individual connection from the Vedic point of view. But coming back to that, that's there. That's kind of determinism, if you will. Now, Charak also says it's like a cart and a horse. You know, maybe in those times they had a cart and horse. These days you have a BMW or whatever your car mode of transportation is. But if you have a BMW, you have to take care of it. If it gets a flat tire, you know, you may be born with a BMW or something. And then you still have to take care of it. You have to change the tires, you have to change the oil, you have to wash it, you have to wax it, you have to put it in the garage during the winter. You have to take care of it or else it'll fall apart. If you don't take care of it, it'll fall apart more quickly. If you do take care of it, it'll last longer. So Charak is very clear that those are two dimensions. And then a car typically, you know, I won't say the new cars, but at least in the older cars, they have a lifespan, maybe 100,000 kilometers or miles or something like that. And that was kind of it. But if you took better care, maybe it could go 120,000 miles or 150,000 miles. And if you took less care of it, then it has less. And then if a windstorm comes along or a hailstorm, you know, if your car is vulnerable, that's it. You know, you hit a pothole and wasn't your fault. You didn't put the pothole there, but there was a pothole on the road and you didn't take care of your car well enough, and that's it. Or the car was only meant to last. That was its 100,000th mile, and then that's it. Or, you know, if you've taken good care of the pothole and you drive very carefully and you bought a newer car and you were lucky enough to get a 2020 version, which has a longer lifespan, then the pothole doesn't affect you. So yes, free will and determinism are both there in the Charak perspective. But Charak does emphasize the whole Ayurveda is all about what you could do. Charak says, look, if there was nothing that you could do about your health, if it was all determined, I wouldn't be writing this book. Mm-hmm. So the reason I wrote this book or cognized it and shared it with the world is here are 101 things that you can do. Mm. And so often we emphasize what to do about the body, which Charak spends a lot on, but we forget the mind the body is like 1/4 of the equation. The mind is another fourth, more or less. The environment is another fourth, equally important. And then, of course, there's being there, the source of them all. We won't say that's equally important. That's the source of all of them. But we have to remember all those domains. So I think that was your question. Can we do something about it? And yes, we can, from both modern and ancient points of view. It's very well documented. You change your emotions, you can change your epigenome, you change your diet, you change the air pollution, air quality. It's very sensitive to your exposures, and it's dynamic. That means, it can go up or down over your lifespan. So you have to manage your lifespan. And we did another study on transcendental meditation and telomeres, telomere repair. Telomeres are the ends of the DNA. And then there's a way to repair that DNA. So the better you repair that part of your DNA, the longer you live. And then we found that those people who practice transcendental meditation over 3 or 4 months were able to show an improvement in their ability to repair their DNA and maintain what they have. So yes, those are all factors.
Now, Dr. Schneider,
Yes,
you're a medical doctor, fellow of the American College of Cardiology, but you sound like a minister of religion, almost. No, I'm teasing now, but what I mean is that you have become so comprehensive in your thinking. You have become so all-inclusive and so sensitive to every influence that comes to us and that its effect on our health. In your current thinking, what would you say are maybe 5 top hits for anybody to take care of, to look out for their health, just to finish off with?
right. I was thinking of your comment. In traditional language, the Vaidya is considered a master of those 4 worlds. Yes. That we can talk about, and master and those 7 points. That's what Maharishi wanted. Yeah. He wanted more than herbal medicine. He wanted mastery of those 7 dimensions, from the innermost to the outermost, and how they communicate with each other. That's the ideal doctor. So I've spent this time trying to do that and trying to share that with other people.
It's very beautiful.
So those top 10, you asked for top 5. Actually, I've written about the top 10. Oh. We can do another session if you like. But the summary I give, I've summarized Chot's behavioral rasayanas, Achar Rasayana, which is a complete summary of all one has to do to reformat one's exposome. And of course, one has to get the rest of the world to join you. There's a lot you can do a lot on your own, and more people that join you, the better. Let's say that. But it starts from again, we can talk more detail, and I've written about this, but the basic point is it goes from gross to subtle. That's the most systematic way to think about it. You want to manage your environment to the best of your ability. That's the most relative level. So there's all sorts of things to manage your physical, social, and geographic environment. They get Vastu and everything in there.
And not live in a place that's very polluted, perhaps.
Right. If you can live in a pure environment, I think you live in a forest. That's a very nice place to live. Maharshi certainly had his place there. So to live in the clean, balanced environment, the physical and man-made environment. And then the next level is to manage your personal physiological environment. So that's with don't get tired, like number one. I mean, you can take anything you want, all the vitamins and supplements, but if you're exhausting yourself, that's the foundation. So that's Maharishi always emphasized that. Don't get exhausted. That's the balance of rest and activity. So that, and then after that, there's diet and exercise, going more from the physical to more subtle. And then daily routine. And then you go to one's psychological environment, mind or psychological environment. And that there's both outer and inner, how you relate to other people, how you behave with other people. Chart talks about compassion and nonviolence, ahimsa. And today we talked about how himsa or violence contributes to these worldwide disasters. So ahimsa, nonviolent, compassionate behavior. Jama is talking about that. That's one of the main points we talked about today. So that's the next level of our environment. And then going inner to that, it is our thoughts and our knowledge and our understanding and our attitude and our perceptions. And to the extent that we can gain knowledge of the science of creative intelligence, knowledge of Maharishi Vedic science, knowledge of how the world works on a deep level. Those are all our courses at MIU and Meru and all of Maharishi's institutions around the world teach how the world works, and that helps. And then the next level, that's Gyan and Vigyan, knowledge, relative knowledge. You teach your courses on how to plant the seed, how to harvest it. That's relative knowledge, but equally part of all of this, but part of this whole package. And then there's spiritual knowledge, the deeper, subtle laws of nature, quantum laws of nature. And then there's smriti. No, there's samadhi and smriti. So samadhi is transcending, and then smriti is I remember. Mm. I remember who I am. I remember who the world is. And I remember this whole thing. So that's from outermost exposome to innermost level. It's a summary of the 10 behavioral personas.
It's very interesting that the Journal of the American Medical Association, the Lancet, these top journals are writing about this kind of thing. So are you finding that your colleagues are open to this kind of thinking, these ideas?
You know, with planetary health, the world that I see in medicine and healthcare is changing. I think it took a crisis. We saw a lot of changes this past year in the world of health. There's a lot more discussion now about equity. Everyone deserves good health. Mm. You know, the basic morality is now a big topic of discussion in the United States and in other parts of the world. So, and concerns about the environment and concerns about the social structures and how they contribute to well-being or don't, and how everyone has a birthright to happiness and health. So, and these more innovative, newer ways of technologies that are consistent with Vedic technologies. Yeah. You know, there's been a lot of sadness in the world of healthcare this past year or two. On the other hand, I've seen breakthroughs, which I think are evolutionary. I think the knowledge of transcending, you know, the world of healthcare is moving in that direction. You know, these other layers are a little easier to get to, these relative layers. but we're getting more and more subtle, more and more expanded in the transcendental level. Actually, in medicine, there's something called the biopsychosocial spiritual perspective. So I think that's beginning to wake up too. In the United States, we have these Heal the Healer programs sponsored by the David Lynch Foundation, where healthcare workers are now taking advantage of transcendental meditation. I think driven by the stress of the past year, but there's that positive that transcending is getting its way into the healthcare system and healthcare providers. So yes, I think even with everything going on, I think I see that the world of health is changing through the efforts of Maharshi's ministry, Global Ministry of Health, and all of its functions around the world.
And the rising collective consciousness. So, Dr. Schneider, we need to close now, but I do want to just thank you for your work over the past 30, 40, how many years, bringing the timeless knowledge, Vedic knowledge, to your colleagues in their own language. That is one thing I see that you have been doing all these years, is translating it a bit so that they feel, oh yes, this is okay, this I can understand. He's talking stuff that, not funny stuff in a foreign language. He's talking about the leading edge of our own discipline, our own tradition. So I want to congratulate you and thank you for that.
Thank you, Peter. And when I said Ministry of Health, I mean the expanded version. Planetary Health now includes all the disciplines of knowledge and technologies of civilization. So thank you, and it's really evolutionary for me to be part of this changing time. With you announcing it to the world and with everyone working together.
Thank you, Dr. Schneider. And Maharshi just blessed us. We had no idea when we learned to meditate what Maharshi was giving us. And now we've spent our lives expanding and expanding and expanding and enjoying these waves after waves of knowledge, expanding into just greater and greater wisdom. Thank you so much, Dr. Schneider, and we look forward to the next one whenever you're ready.
All right. All the best.
Thank you. Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev.
We'll end by ringing the bell of invincibility for each individual and for the entire connectome to be invincible and healthy. Jai Gurudev.
Heaven is descending, descending on the earth. Heaven is descending, descending on the earth. Heaven on earth, heaven on earth, heaven on earth. Heaven is descending, descending on the earth. Light of God is bringing heaven on earth. Gurudev's grace is bringing heaven on earth. Heaven on earth, heaven on earth, heaven on earth. Light of God is bringing heaven on earth. is descending, descending on the earth. Heaven on earth, heaven on earth, heaven on earth. Heaven is descending, descending on the earth. Heaven is descending.